Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin Ryman, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Ryman, and I'm super duper excited to have a conversation today with my good friend, Mira Rubin. Hi, Mira.
Hi, honey. How are you?
Awesome. You've been on the podcast once before, but you've been doing so many amazing things that I thought it was time that we brought you back so you could fill us in. So let me start by introducing you, and then we'll get into all the fun stuff. So Mira Rubin, everyone, is a transformational coach working with change makers and visionaries to shape a world that works. How awesome is that? Over the course of many years and thousands of client sessions, Mira has developed and refined her powerfully transformative core connection process, which is a modality guided by a client's own greater intelligence that results in profound, rapid, and lasting change. I can attest to this personally, having worked with Mira in the past, and also because I've sent many people to Mira who've had remarkable recoveries. I mean, just things that you kind of can't imagine they would overcome, lifelong issues that sort of go away. It's been amazing. Her work is varied, creative, ever evolving, and illuminating. And it's really all about connection to our authentic self, to each other, and to our world. Her work is about taking the reins in our role as creators of our own lived experience. And I think we're going to talk some more about that during today's conversation. In 2017, after a lifelong search for meaning, Mira had an epiphany that led her to co-found Sustainability Now and the Sustainability Now podcast as a way to educate and share life-affirming technologies and paradigms, to provide connection across siloed disciplines, and to inspire practical actions to heal our world. Mira, thank you so much for all that work. It takes an epiphany, I think, to invoke that level of commitment and enthusiasm. And I'm so grateful for you and all that you do.
Thank you so much. The feeling's mutual. I'm so grateful for you and all you do. You know,
Well,
the epiphany came from actually being brokenhearted.
Hmm.
And whenever I would think of our world, it would just bring me to tears. And in fact, recognizing that it was that brokenheartedness that led me to my definition of purpose, made it really clear that that's one of the most important keys to finding our own sense of meaning and purpose. So there was such a hopelessness and helplessness that I felt like I had to take action. I had to go find stories that were affirming. I had to go do something, learn something that would support another way of thinking about the world and cultivate hope. And taking that action, that's the source of the inspiration that I have to do the work I do in a coaching context, in a one-on-one context, in a group context, and also through Sustainability Now.
Yeah, well, they say that if the state of the world as it is breaks your heart, then you were born to help build a new one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We all have different things, different aspects of it that touch our soul and that call us into a new way of expressing ourselves in the world. And then the beauty of that purpose is the beauty of experiencing one's purpose is that it calls us to be greater than we know ourselves to be. Right? It calls us to push our limits, to go beyond our small self, to get stepping into an expression that allows us to live beyond those limits.
Yeah, well, that's sort of my definition of spirituality, is like something that connects you to something outside of yourself that is greater than you, that invokes a kind of love and commitment and compassion in you that makes the world a better place.
And courage. Because without that commitment to the bigger thing, I wouldn't do anything. I would be cowering in a corner somewhere, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's true. It really does. It feels so compelling, but it's often so scary to push outside what we're typically doing. So I'm curious to know if in the midst of that epiphany, was there like one clear straw that broke the camel's back in the breaking of your heart that you can look back to and be like, it was that moment when I saw this on the news, or I heard this story, or experienced this in a relationship? Like, was there one thing?
Well, actually, I think it was an experience we shared through Visionary Business Mastery, where the Dickens process, where we got to look at our lives and project. It was a perfect time of year. I mean, it was essentially the Christmas Carol story, you know, projecting your life into the future and looking at what was going to happen if you just kept doing the same thing, and feeling the emotions of that, and the constraints and the limits and the sorrow, and it making it so big that when there was an opportunity to step into another reality, I took it. And that was part of the exercise. And we actually got to take a step first to visualize this new possibility, and then to literally physically step over a line into that new state of being. And I don't know about you, I'm guessing it was equally powerful, but hugely powerful motivator to uh take the reins, to recreate our story, to recreate our notion of who we are and who we can be. Like I had these dreams, I had these ideas, I had the sadness, but I also had a helpless hopelessness about it. And that exercise just moved me into a whole different dimension.
Wow. Yeah. No, I don't think we've ever talked about the fact that that was the place, that was the thing. I mean, that was powerful for me too, to the Dickens process. And one of the things that's so, I think, powerful and speaks to this sort of ownership of your story that you talk about all the time, and I think experience that in this process, was that it's like you fast forward down a pathway based on your current action, imagining what you're going to look like in 10 years, like literally imagining walking by a mirror. And what does your face look like? What are your shoulders doing? Has your hair fallen out yet? Like, what's going on? And really being forced to kind of reckon with what are the downstream actions or events of the actions you're currently taking. But then like, but we're not there. Rewind. Here we are again. What if we made a different choice? And that's so powerful. That's so powerful. And I think a lot of people get stuck in the just focusing on the future that they're in, and the worry and the stress around that, without taking a step back and being like, that hasn't happened yet. That hasn't happened yet. I still have a choice. So talk about the way in which choice is is discussed in your programs and in your coaching.
Choice and freedom. That's the whole foundation of the work that I do on pretty much every level, whether it's sustainability now or my coaching, my one-on-one group stuff, whatever. That part of it is making visible the invisible, or making the invisible visible. And we live in these stories all of our lives, and we don't even know their stories. As children, we're taught. We're taught who we are. We're taught how the world is. We're taught how to talk, how to behave. I mean, you can see that even like within families, where you can tell that people are related because they have the same inflections of voice even. And we don't even notice these things. We don't notice the water we're swimming in. And we're part of a consensus reality. And so the choice comes about when we allow ourselves to be present to the water that we're swimming in, where we're making the invisible visible, where we're asking questions like, what would it be if I could make it up any way I want? We accept so many, just asking that question is deeply unsettling for a lot of people, really upsetting, like, because they don't know what they want. And that's ridiculous because things are as they are. But the truth is, I see this every day with clients. People come into a session with one reality and leave with another. They like just a simple conversation with someone who was talking about, I don't understand why I have this block to taking care of myself. And I think this is probably something that a lot of people can relate to. So as we were talking, we were able to source all kinds of ways that they take care of themselves, all kinds of ways that they make choices for themselves that serve them well. And they were focusing on different choices that they could get critical about, but there were an equal, if not greater, amount of choices that they were making in support of themselves. And so they left that conversation empowered. There was another person who was talking about how they had a problem with commitment. And then they realized, wait a second, I've been committed to the organization I'm working with for 29 years. I've been doing fitness training regularly for years and years, so they were like, I don't have a problem with commitment. I commit to the things I want to commit to, and I don't commit to the things I don't want to. And just changing that story, it's a simple twist. It's a simple shift, but it makes all the difference in the world.
Amazing. And so I would imagine there are people who resist this, like you say, sort of can't imagine what they want. And I imagine the people who find you, in your coaching program, with the core connection work are people who are already at some level kind of buying into this notion that we have responsibility for our lives and we actually have way more power to make choices than we think. So what is your feeling about bridging the gap? Like, do you have other ways to reach people who are kind of like earlier in that sort of spectrum of sort of, awareness, or maybe in the stages of change, not so much in denial, but like, how do you ooch them along, or are you working on that, or is that someone else's job? Just curious about where your focus is.
That's such a good question. Up until now, it's been somebody else's job. That the people that I work with are the people who've done a boatload of work already. They're people that know that they create their reality on some level. They may not see all the mechanisms of it. I don't think any of us do, but we get to unearth them so that they can be engaged in the exploration in a conscious way, even if it's uncomfortable, and it often is, to recognize that it can be uncomfortable, it can be frightening because we're going into an unknown. But they are people that have the resilience to be able to appreciate the benefit of that journey. They're not like, ouch, I'm done. They're more like, okay, take a deep breath. Let's be present here and see what we can create. And so as far as nurturing people along, I am on the precipice of starting a group program that's really meant to introduce people to more of these concepts. And I consider them frameworks to live through that make a huge difference, that they're practices, because it's not that this is more real or less real. I am of the greater and greater conviction that we really truly create our reality. by the narratives that we have, by the stories and the frameworks that we live from, and that those frameworks dictate what we can perceive, dictate what's even possible. Because when I believe that the world is against me, and it's me against the world kind of thing, my experience of life is going to be one of defensiveness. And I'm going to project that defensiveness into the world. And what I'm tuned to look for is threat everywhere. Versus if I believe that life is happening for me, one of my favorite things, life is happening for me and through me rather than to me. It could sound really trite, but it's actually the foundation of a practice that I deepen into on a daily basis, and especially when things go sideways. When life is showing up in ways that I don't like, I get to breathe into life is happening for me. What would it look like if this is a gift, if it's serving me? And it doesn't mean we don't get knocked to our knees. It just means that we can breathe into it in a different way. It means that we can brush ourselves off however long it takes and give ourselves the time to do that, and then to recognize the opportunity that was gifted us in that situation. And sometimes we can't even recognize it. We just get to trust, which is also, so there was a situation arising for me that in the past I would have gotten so angry about, and I would have been so anxious about. This just happened yesterday. And what I'm noticing is I'm able to just breathe into it and say, it's going to be okay. One way or another, I'm going to not get through this, like have to get through the other side, but one way or the other, it's going to resolve itself. Why worry?
Yeah, well, there's so much wisdom in that. And I think a lot of that, I mean, I'm imagining some of that comes from just, we live through terrifying or tragic or, deeply unsettling chapters, right, in our lifetimes. And we might feel like we're going to die, or our life will go away the way it is. And at the end of it, if we still have a pulse, we're like, wow. I mean, one of the things we learned experientially is that I made it through that. And the more struggle we go through, the more we're able to sort of breathe through and be like, you know what? I've been through worse, or I've been through the same and I've survived. Do you think there are faster ways to get there than just living through 100 calamities and taking notes?
Well, I think, first of all, it's not just that I got through it. It's that circumstance, whatever it was, helped to shape me into who I'm becoming and who I've become. And that's a really big deal. I grew up with depression for most of my life. Like, I probably could have been committed at one point. I thought about suicide every day until finally at 40, I decided I was going to kill myself. I figured out where I was going to do it. And I had a moment of grace to say, oh, girl, you need some help here. And I actually was able to go and find some support. And that moment of grace, that recognition that I had reached a turning point, I used that to give myself permission to do what I wanted to do. I went back to school for computer animation and multimedia, and I wouldn't have given myself permission to do that in the past because I was having to make a living and I was having to do all this other stuff that was based on values that weren't mine. So like that, people would consider it tragic, to have had that level of despair. And it was in its way, but it was also cathartic. So it's not just getting through it. It's not just surviving it, but going through the crucible of life, that as if we can come out the other side, and we don't always, but if we can come out the other side without bitterness, without dying, without bitterness, without hatred, or victimhood, once we can get to the place where it is like the butterfly, it is like the metamorphosis of the caterpillar, because then we recognize that it was those things that shaped us to become who we are in the world.
Yeah.
So, and as far as quicker ways, one of the quicker ways is not resisting. So, it's like, oh, this emotion comes up and we're taught just power through, just keep going, just push on and ignore it. Like when we have a tragedy or a death in the family, or a death of a loved one, or some other kind of debilitating circumstance, we try to push beyond it without allowing ourselves that brushing off opportunity to be present to what are the feelings, what is going on for us, what do I need. We deny ourselves so often, and that is resistance. We're resisting feeling the feelings, we're resisting going through the tunnel, and the more we resist it, the more upheaval we create.
Yeah. What do they say? What you resist persists.
It does.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's so true. And I think that there are a lot of tools that people could cultivate to help them kind of move through difficult emotions. I loved core connections with you because that's another way to do it. Can you talk a little bit about what core connections is and kind of what that looks like for a client?
Sure. I've learned so much from this work, and my clients are my teachers. So I have just reveled in the expanded awareness of how we be. And part of it is to recognize how malleable reality is. So the core connection process is a process that has a somatic component where we touch into what's going on in our physical experience, our emotional experience, and also sort of our liminal consciousness experience, where it's almost dream time, it's free association, where we have this inner well of experience, information, symbols that are uniquely meaningful to us. So I started out with hypnosis and neurolinguistic programming, and the thing with those processes is that they're guided by the practitioner, right? And there's no way in the world I could ever access that person's inner symbology. And what the beauty of the core connection work is that after we decide what we're working on, myself and a client, through looking for an acupuncture point that's going to make a difference. Like, I start the very first session with the question, what in your way of being, if it were to change, would be life altering? So we're serious. We're talking about the real stuff from the very beginning. And then we come up with things like self-worth or self-trust, or clearing the anxiety, or whatever it is. We find out what it is. And then we go into this process that's a free association process, where I ask, well, what's the first thing that pops into your head? And then it's like, sometimes it's popsicles. I have a client who has a lot of popsicles. Sometimes it's cartoons. Sometimes it's an inferno. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it's playful. But then we say, okay, well, what are you noticing about the beach ball, for instance? And what colors does it have? And what's the emotion that you're feeling as you're witnessing this event or this thing? And where in your body is that feeling localized? And how would you characterize that sensation? And then it's interesting because the process is quite simple. It's just bouncing back and forth between these different things that arise. And so I've seen the beach ball, and all of a sudden I'm sad. And it's like, oh, okay, so how old are you? And oftentimes it's 3 years old, 5 years old, and what's happening there? And so we go on this journey, and at the end, people feel differently. Things that have been there their whole lives sometimes just dissolve, and it's crazy. It's crazy, but it's because they're their own inner electrical engineers, and they know how to rewire things, not consciously, but they have the intelligence to, with in this environment that we create of intentionality. And I've come to realize that that's probably one of the things that I bring to the work, is being able to create this space that has the expectation and agreement that this information can come forward, and that it's going to be the thing that was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it works amazingly well, and that you are creating that safe space, and that people are tapping into their deep wells of intelligence. But do you have like even if it's just your hypothesis, like do you know why it works?
Again, it is hypothesis. And I've been trying to figure this out for years. And I have other clients who've been trying to describe what it is for years. And the reason I give people a gift of a session in order to promote my work is because it's still indescribable. But I think it works because, first of all, people are being able to be present to their experience without judgment. And that's not a minor thing. So they're not judging, and they're not making up more stories about the thing. They're actually being present to their experience. That's one piece. And I think another piece is that we're embodying it. So we have these symbols. Most of us operate pretty much from our heads or our heart in terms of reactivity, but not necessarily in terms of conscious presence. And so with these symbols, the symbols stimulate certain things. Memories come up that people haven't thought of forever. All kinds of things come up. And then we're also incorporating corporeal. We're incorporating the experience by people being able to identify the sensations. And so many of us are completely disconnected from our bodies. And when we have emotion, we're often disconnected even with the emotion. And in this work, and my other premise is that the emotion's just energy. It's energy that's been compressed. And what we're doing is we're allowing that energy to move. And we're not attributing greater meaning to it. So the lack of judgment, the direct experience, and that it's on multiple levels. So it's happening in the mind, it's happening in the heart, emotion, it's happening in the body.
Yeah. Well, at this point, I'm sure that you've piqued a lot of interest in our listeners, some of whom heard you say you offer a free session. So if that's still in play, we need to talk about that. But if not, I want to hear more about, like, who is this not okay for? Are there any people who should steer
Yes,
clear of this work?
100%. So again, this work that I'm talking about, the core connection work, I call it postdoc work. It is only for people who have done a ton of work. And so I work with the coaches, the teachers, the healers, the visionaries, the people that have been on a self-development path. And the reason is that it gets to the real deal, and it can be super uncomfortable. And people that don't have the framework to be able to integrate this information, or to be able to sit with that discomfort and upheaval, get thrown off the rails. And unfortunately, I have seen that, and it has been devastating to me to be part of that for somebody else. So this work is not for people who are just getting started on the self-development journey. This work is not for people who are in active addiction. This work is not for people who are having food regulation issues, anorexia, bulimia, people that are doing self-harm. This is not for those folks. And I actually had someone who told me he was an active alcoholic, a functioning alcoholic. And I said, no, I can't do that. I won't do that to you, because those conditions are so much a coping thing for people. And to put them in a stressed position, it can just create a worse spiral.
Yeah, yeah. So basically, people who need still to develop some tools to learn how to regulate their emotions would need to do that first before they worked with you.
Well, I think, and it's even, this is a spiritual thing too. I'm gonna claim that. I tried to not claim that for a long time, but it really is about a connection to our deepest authentic self. And what happens in the discovery of our deepest authenticity is that there's a lot of chaos sometimes as old structures dissolve and fall away. And usually at the end of a session, people feel better. Usually. And if they don't, we'll do another session. But this it is really not for the faint of heart, the journey of true self-discovery. And it means being willing to shift out of our old ideas of who we are and how the world is.
Yeah, I think that's well said. So, before we end, I want to give you a chance to talk about some upcoming excitement because I know you're planning a challenge.
I
Are
am,
you?
and actually I am intending, and who knows what's going to happen with this. I'm intending that it'll be something that's revisited, so hopefully this will be timeless. But the challenge is a 5-day challenge, and it is an exploration of the foundational tenets of my work, and bringing us into a new um, a new structure from which to live that is much more forgiving, that is much more generative, like really taking on writing our own story of life, essentially. That these are practices, essentially, practices of thought. And so, yeah, that's what's going to happen. Hopefully, the first one is going to air the first couple months of this year. It's going to be 5 days of 2025 coming up. And it will also lead into an opportunity for people to be the first folks in my group coaching practice. So,
Cool. This is what you were sort of referring to earlier about now reaching out to a larger group of people who might be sort of earlier on in the process, but really ready to sort of start taking steps in learning these tools and this
yeah,
mindset.
yeah. And to navigating these frameworks. It really is a framework because the context of our belief about what life is and about who we are shapes everything. And so when we recognize that and adopt some ideas that are life affirming, like we live in a culture that's founded in separation and othering. And now, more than ever, going into this coming year with all the political upheaval and with all the climate upheaval and who knows what else, um, to be able to look at life from a place of affirmation and vitality and possibility is very challenging in a cultural um, consensus of reality that propagates fear. So this is really about let's create the antidote to that.
I love that you used that word. I was going to use it too. It's kind of the perfect antidote to fear and the uncertainty of our times. Um, who is not right for your challenge?
I think anybody could take on my challenge. I really do. I would hope that anybody could start to step into that. Um, Part of it is stepping out of victimhood. And the thing is, I guess who's not right for the challenge is people who are really committed to their story staying the way it is.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to share some links to that in the show notes. All right. So I want to circle back briefly to something that you and I talked about on a walk a couple months ago. I was so fascinated by this, Mira, because you have such a breadth of experience and so many profound experiences in your life. And you shared with me about something that had happened in the past. I don't remember even when it was or how long ago, but that you had recently sort of unearthed some old writing that you did. And I would love to hear you talk some more about this because I think it's probably going to blow some people's minds that this is even a practice that could be engaged in. And then just the learnings that you got from this, I think were so incredibly powerful. Will you talk to us about that experience?
Sure, I'd love to. I don't know how long it's going to be up. Should I give the website? Because I may like privatize it, but it's public for now. Should I mention
Sure,
it?
sure.
Okay, so there's a website with all the writings uh, called manifestingsource.com. And I don't know, again, I don't know how long it's going to be up, but back in, I think it was 2009, I had been exposed to conversations with God. It was Neil Donald Walsh, and I thought, oh, that's a pretty cool idea. And so I decided to just take 15 minutes a day and ask questions and sit with those questions and write down what came. And so, Kristin, is this a video podcast too?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have my book here. Let me just grab it.
And for those
So,
who don't know about Neil Donald Walsh, so he's a guy who one day, I forget the exact context, basically sat down to write and was like, why is this happening? Or he had some question, like some existential like yell out into the void that he put onto paper. And then he just started answering himself. And he was like, where is this coming from? And it was like, well, this is God. And you asked, so I'm answering. I mean, I'm sort of simplifying it. But then like 4 books later, there's like a bunch of downloads, that he got through this process of automatic writing with that clear intention of like basically asking God for answers, and answers came. Very interesting.
So you said automatic writing, okay? This wasn't that automatic. But I would ask a question. This is really funny. I would ask a question and I would just be quiet and I'd hear words, sort of hear words. It's not like I heard a voice, but I got words in my head and I would write down the words. And then I'd sit and I'd get more words and I would be arguing with the words. I'd be like, oh, I'm just making this up, or that's stupid, or but anyway, I wrote the words down. And this is what it looks like. Like when I write something, I cross out and correct. But I have pages and pages of this writing that is just straight writing because I paused and I waited for the words. And even though they didn't necessarily make sense, I wrote them down. And I think that that's very much the way that I do the core connection work, actually. And I think that that informed my confidence in people's ability to bring forth these symbols and these journeys that they go on with me. So it's really really interesting that so many of the ideas that came through are the foundation of the work that I do now. And I hadn't even realized that connection till you and I were talking. And I had just recently rediscovered or revisited the writings. And they're kind of universal guidance in so many ways. Really brilliant, brilliant, brilliant writing, like way different from anything I would write.
Yeah, it's so cool. So yeah, I can see that up is still up. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. If by the time you're hearing this, it's gone, poof, you know, here today, gone tomorrow. But like for those who can
Well,
find it,
if it's gone, I'm going to make it available maybe through my membership site or in some other way.
gotcha. Cool. Wow. And I also just want to say, like, you're such a badass that all this is up there already. Like when I talked to you, you're like, oh yeah, I have these writings. I'm not sure what to do with them. And now like poof, here they are. Okay. Yeah, they're all
Oh
here.
no, they've been up there for years. But
Oh, you put
what
them here
happened,
initially.
they've been there for years, but at one point the website went offline. That's how I discovered, actually, how I rediscovered them, because I was having problems with another website, and then I discovered that it was offline. So I brought Manifesting Source back for maybe for a limited appearance.
Limited run.
Yeah.
Limited run. Awesome. Thank you, Mira, for like telling us that story. It's really so cool. And I think for those who want to try this, there's no reason not to, right? Like, do you have any best practices for how to get downloads from the universe?
Well, I think I really do believe that we all have access to that. And the biggest thing, and I see this with clients too, is to be willing to get out of the way and to listen without judgment. So to let something emerge and just be a scribe. So kind of get out of the way. And like I said, I had arguments with myself for every sentence that I wrote down pretty much. It was not just a flowing automatic thing. It just took being willing to be quiet. And I think it's kind of like a meditation practice. When you designate a certain time of day, that helps. When you set up a consistent expectation of, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm here. It could be on a stopwatch. I'm here for 20 minutes. I'm going to sit here whether something comes or not. And to not be attached to what comes out. So use it as an exploration. One of the things that I say is curiosity is the antidote to judgment. So allow yourself curiosity to just say, well, what's there? And I would ask questions like, what do you want to tell me today? Or why is there such strife in the world? Or what's the state of consciousness? Or, why not? Ask the questions that you have.
Now, a lot of people might hear that and be concerned that, well, I don't know who I'm getting. Like, is there a way to sort of set the container or expectations so that if you believe that it's possible to channel spirits, that you're like channeling something or writing the words for someone who is sort of not going to harm you or stick around in a negative way? Like, what are the ways to sort of keep it safe for people who might be concerned about that?
So I don't have those beliefs, so that I wasn't an essential thing for me. However, if somebody has the beliefs that you could be bringing in something that is malevolent, either don't do it or give yourself protections that you have confidence in. Again, I believe we create our own reality. So, if you believe that you can create protections by wearing different stones, or like I have a belief that this stone, this is labradorite, and that it provides access to other dimensions of consciousness. I have a belief that that's probably true, or I'm entertaining the possibility, and it feels good to wear it, so I'm wearing it. But if it makes you feel good to create a ritual, to sage, to say prayers, to whatever it is that is going to create this sacred and safe space for you. And I don't necessarily advocate believing what's written. It's just read it. Does it resonate? If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, don't bother. I'm not saying that those writings are the truth. I'm saying that for me, they resonated pretty intensely. And for some other people, they have as well. Don't believe anything, just allow yourself to consider it and see if it fits.
Well, it kind of, that approach sort of gets back to your philosophy of like not taking your stories so seriously. They're just stories, right? They shape your reality. So to some extent, you should take the process of choosing your stories seriously. But
Curating.
the stories themselves are just stories.
And a lot of people take offense to that idea.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who get really upset. I remember years ago, I said, well, that's your story to someone. She wanted to kill me, like thinking that I was saying, oh, you're just lying or you're just making it up. It's not true. That's not what I mean by stories. We are creating a narrative. It's like we're creating the screenplay that we're living in. And we don't necessarily, people who have suffered really deep pain and anguish and devastation to say, and I was one of those people, to say, you're creating that story. I'm not saying that we all know how we're creating those stories. Those stories are gifted us oftentimes in our lives. We're given them as we're growing up. We've inherited stories of suffering and pain and what's right and what's wrong, and we don't even know the things that are running us. They're like programs that are embedded in us. It's not a matter of fault or blame. That's the first thing that people really need to understand. It's like, well, you're creating your reality. You mean it's my fault? I wouldn't do this. If I knew how not to do this, I wouldn't do this. It was like years ago, somebody said to me, stop being so depressed. I'm like, if I knew how to stop being so depressed, I wouldn't be so depressed, right? Because it was excruciating and I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
And so it's not about blaming anybody. It's not like it's your fault that your world is so in such upheaval.
Yeah.
And
I-
we do have an ability to shift that. Once we start noticing how we are helping to create that. When we experience ourselves, when who we are is unworthy, like as a being, which I was for most of my life, unworthy. Here I am, I'm unworthy, and I'm the outsider. I created I, all kinds of experiences that validated that. And it was the reality. I had proof of it all over the place. But that's how it works. So it's a
yeah.
leap of faith to be willing to start shifting that story, and
Yeah.
courage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you're willing to let go of everything you have known and believed about how the world works,
Right.
which is
That's
daunting. I remember my oldest when he was 2, he was a very early talker and very early, like provocative question asker. And he would ask my husband, not necessarily me, which I thought was really fascinating, my husband, the philosopher, Daddy, do you know how the way goes? My husband's like a Taoist philosopher. So he's, the way is all about the Tao. And he's like, you're asking me this like as a 2-year-old. And it was funny, but it was also so profound. And, almost as if he was asking for us to program him, in a sense, like, give us the truth, but like, give me your truth so I can know how the world works. It was
did
really crazy.
anybody ask him if he knew?
Yes, we did.
What did he say?
I wish I could remember. I was a sleep deprived medical student. That's my excuse. Maybe Greg would remember. We asked him lots of questions because he seemed to be tapped in. All children are. They're so tapped in.
Yes.
I've asked all sorts of provocative and crazy questions of my kids, and they always have, not always, but all of them have had answers that knock my socks off.
Yeah.
They're, I guess because they haven't fully been locked into the consensus reality yet about how the way goes,
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this
Exactly.
has been fascinating. I wonder if there's anything that we have sort of just kind of barely touched on that you'd like to expound upon before we finish.
Well, one of my favorite practices is settling into who I am as life expressing itself through my uniqueness. And I invite, that's one of the days, that's one of the challenge, spoiler alert, one of the challenge days. But to look at what are the ramifications of living from that place. First, it connects us to something greater than our small self, right? And if we are life expressing itself, we can't do it wrong.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it ripples from there.
Well, I can't wait for the challenge.
You're so sweet.
I'm so excited for this new way in which you're bringing all of your gifts, so many of your experiential learnings and gifts to the world. And we'll put a link in the show notes to how to find that, if it's still a timely thing or if it's an ongoing challenge, like you said, an ongoing experience. And thank you so much, Mira, for sharing your time and your talent with us today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Kristin. If people want to check out my work, the website is Your Core Connection, singular connection.com. And the challenges will be posted there when they're happening, and you can learn about the coaching, the group coaching practice and the private practice and all that stuff.
All the good stuff.
Oh, and sustainabilitynow.global is the website.
We'll put everything in the show notes so that anywhere people want to bump, they can find it.
Beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too, sweetheart.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.